subjectively the sweetest man I have ever known, with a very close second being my Uncle Ira Carpenter. He lived a very full and diverse life, and I think yesterday at the funeral home, seeing the people that came through, and those of you here today, is evidence of how diverse my father was and the things that he enjoyed in life. Some of you here may be a relative or a friend. You might be a member of his church in that very special Sunday school class. Some of you might be members of the local Greek community, or you might have played on the same tennis team. And then, of course, you may have known my mother and father from their restaurants. I was reflecting on Daddy's life, and the things that I thought about, it seemed like everything kept coming up with a very common theme. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. As I reflected on his life, I saw my father as a survivor. He was born in 1927 on a small island, Skopelos, in Greece. And he was a young boy of 13 when World War II and the German occupation arrived. He was too young to fight, so his brave older brother John went and fought with the Greek resistance while my father stayed home with his sister Merope and his mom and dad. And there was one night that Dad was taken prisoner along with two other men. And they were tied up and they were all beaten and whipped. And while the man on either side of my father died, my father hung on and survived. He made it home. He was bedridden for 6 months with pleurisy, but he survived. He and John came to the U.S. after the war, and they came to the only place where they knew other people, Mississippi. A few months after he arrived, he was asked by a good Greek friend of his, Mrs. Leo, to drive her and 3 friends to church, and she had a brand new car. Well, my dad had no experience driving, and he had no driver's license. But he did it anyway. And they were on a dirt road, and he lost control, and he went through a cotton field, which is now George Berdanis Highway. He managed to make it back up onto the dirt road, and he survived, only to find that the 4 women in the car with him had passed out. And they made it to church, and he survived. He then took a job as a cook in a small place in Greenwood, Mississippi called the Post Office Cafe, and that is where he met the woman that would become the love of his life, my mother, Hazel, who was a waitress there in the summertime. And after a few years, 4 years, you married. 4.5 years, you married. And when the opportunity arrived to own their own restaurant, they picked up and they moved to Georgia, where they raised the 3 of us. Dad was always a do-it-yourself kind of guy, the kind that never read the manual. When something broke, he took it apart, he put it back together, and he discarded the extra pieces that he deemed irrelevant. On more than one occasion, I saw him head out into the woods with a garden hose. He would be all alone. He would wrap that garden hose up around the tree, and with a saw, he would start cutting down the trees that needed to come down all by himself. And he would take the hose and he would pull the tree down, and it would barely miss his head by inches. But it never hit him, and he survived. And yes, my father's scary driving continued. We were at times in the car with him, and he would drive on the wrong side of the median, or he would go down the wrong way on a one-way street. One time, after a Braves game, he stopped in the middle of the interstate where 75 and 85 separate. And I think our Berdanis cousins were with us. Do you remember that, Cecilia? Yeah. And he was just stopping, and he was turning his head in all directions, and we were screaming at him, and we said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He said, "Somebody's honking at me." Well, by the time we were able to realize what was happening, Dad had such a tight grip on the horn, he was honking at himself. So we corrected him. We got back on the road, and every summer. It was one of those beautiful things to look forward to where all of us would go, and usually it was to Panama City, but one year we went to Daytona Beach. And you know, you can drive on Daytona Beach. Well, my brother wanted to rent a motorcycle, but he was too young, didn't have a license, and couldn't fill out the paperwork and couldn't get the bike. So my dad, of course, who's never ridden a motorcycle, went up and paid for the bike and got a quick set of instructions as my brother waited a few hundred yards down the road. Dad opened up the throttle and the clutch at the same time. And I promise you, it became a scene right out of the Bible. Or as God parted the Red Sea for Moses, he parted those sunbathers from my father that night. And they scattered right and left, leaving a perfect path for my dad to go right down the middle. And they each had a tire track as a memento of their day on the beach. And Dad survived. I would like to share with you one more story of survival, and I think this one probably is my most precious memory. I took a trip with my dad to Greece in 1995, and it turned out to be his last trip back to his homeland. And we were staying on the island that he was born on, and we went out to dinner one night. And we were sitting there, and I noticed that a man at another table was staring at my father. And he waited for us to finish dinner. And then he came over, and he started singing to my father. And when he finished, they were both crying, and they hugged and held on to each other for several minutes. I didn't speak Greek, so I didn't understand what was going on, so I asked my father. And he was telling me that during the war, the locals had very little food, and they were basically starving to death. And one night, Dad and a group of younger boys took a boat out, and they went around to the other side of the island to kill a goat so that they could bring it back to feed their families. And as they were heading back in the boat to home after they had killed the goat, they noticed German patrol boats all in the water. And all the boys in the boat became frightened because they knew if they were caught, they would either be beaten or killed. And my father, to calm everybody down, began to sing to them. And they did make it back safe and sound to their families. And this man was one of the young boys that was in the boat that day. And he was remembering my father's strength and his courage that night. And he sang the song back to my father in gratitude. In closing, when we're fortunate enough, I think, to have time where we know that our loved ones won't be with us much longer, we start thinking about little questions, maybe little things you didn't think to ask, that just might seem so irrelevant at the time or mundane, but they're things that come to mind. And I was thinking the other day, I never asked Dad how to relight the pilot light in the basement. And then I started thinking about the symbolism behind that. It's a seemingly mundane question, but when I really thought about it, you know, Dad had kept that light on for us our entire lives. He quietly looked after us, and he kept us safe, and he kept us warm, and he provided for us. He kept the pilot light burning, and he truly was the keeper of our flame. Thank you for being here.